Welcome to Redundancy Matters with me, June Hogan. I'm a qualified career coach and outplacement specialist, and I've got a background in HR. And this is the podcast where I help HR professionals and leaders managing redundancies to put people at the heart of the process. This week, I talked to Lorna Moles, a fractional HR leader with 20 years experience managing everything from large-scale restructures to single-role deletions. Lorna shares her personal and professional experiences, including what it feels like to be on the receiving end of a redundancy conversation, and why that shaped the way she now supports organisations. We explore how to plan every detail so nothing gets overlooked. We talk about the importance of preparing line managers for tough conversations, and how to keep the survivors engaged, motivated and supported. And also why HR teams need to make sure they must look after themselves in all of this as well. So I really hope you enjoy our conversation, and if you want to go deeper into managing redundancies, you'll find a link in the show notes to register for a free monthly lunch and learn session where my colleague Robin and I, who's a redundancy expert, explore different aspects of managing redundancies. And you'll also find lots of resources on my website, wildwoodcoaching.co.uk. Okay, so let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to today's episode of Redundancy Matters. I'm delighted to be joined by Lorna Moles. Lorna is from Feral HR and she's a fractional HR leader with 20 years experience in HR. And I'm so looking forward to our conversation today. So welcome, Lorna.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure for you to be here and to be sharing all your experience around managing redundancies, which I know you've got lots of insights to share. So before we get started, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much. Like you said, I run a business called Feral HR, which I launched last year in 2024. Before that, I had over 20 years of generalist HR experience in quite large corporate environments. So I worked for large global businesses for all of my HR career before I went out on my own. I am an HR generalist by background, so I've seen quite a lot of the employee life cycle from start to finish, and clearly that does include, unfortunately, redundancy programs. And as part of my career, I've led and supported so many different projects, including redundancy programs as well. So whether that comes from restructures and organizational change, or whether it's, things like cost reductions and business downturns. And since running Feral HR last year, I've picked up a number of different projects and clients. So some of them are quite small businesses with different, perhaps, cost challenges than some of the larger ones. I also support in-house HR teams with change programs such as redundancy processes too.
Wow, so lots of experience to share with us. So yeah, looking forward to hearing more about that. So I always ask guests who come on the podcast, and why does redundancy matter to you?
Yeah, so I guess for me, I always say that I unfortunately have a lot of experience of redundancy programs. It's something that I'm proud to support as an HR practitioner because I think it's so important to get it right. I've seen it done really, really well, where you act with fairness, with empathy and looking after the people at the heart of it. And I have also seen the other side of it where perhaps things don't always go as smoothly. And it can leave lasting damage, I guess, on not only the individuals that are affected, but the colleagues that they've left behind. I was fortunate enough to avoid redundancy for all of my career up until last year. So I guess it's become a little bit more personal to me in recent times. But what I would say is I was at risk of redundancy a good few times throughout my career. Every time I did secure another role within the organisation, but I do remember, I guess, the lasting impact of that process on me. And I always went on a few times to leave the organisation that I'd been working with. Even though I'd secured an internal role, there was something that had changed in me and led me to move on. So I guess it's just thinking about the impact on people even after the process has come to an end.
And that's something that's often overlooked. We spend so much time focusing on the individuals who are impacted and ultimately leave. So it's really interesting to hear that and having that experience on both sides of the table. And how has that kind of informed, I guess, how you then approach redundancy processes, having had those experiences?
Yeah, so I think for me, I've always been somebody that will say to an employee who's at risk of redundancy, if they do end up being confirmed as redundant from their role, letting them know that something better is going to be on the other side. And I now do have proof of that myself. I've had a really good run with my business over the last year or year and a half. I'm enjoying life. I feel definitely freer and have more flexibility compared to when I was in an in-house role. So for me, something better has come from a really difficult time. And I can now talk about that with a bit more experience behind me personally.
Yeah, and there is always life after redundancy, but when people are kind of in the thick of it, understandably, they're dealing with what's immediately in front of them, aren't they? So that's the thing that's important. So I know when we were kind of talking before, and as you've just indicated there, you've got lots of experience of managing different programs. Do you want to just give us an overview of the sorts of programs you've been involved in when you've been managing redundancies?
Yeah, sure. So I guess moving through my HR career, clearly, when I was more junior in my career, it was around supporting a process and learning about the process. So, note taking, preparing information, preparing documents and data. To the later part of my career, leading those processes and really planning them and thinking about from start to finish what that looks like. Obviously, starting with the business case and why we are looking at headcount reductions in the first place. So I've got experience of larger scale redundancies needing collective consultation. I've got experience of the smaller ones, perhaps, one or two single role deletions. I don't think either is easier. I think they're both just different. Clearly, with collective consultation, you do have a lot more work to do in terms of meeting your obligations from a statutory perspective. And perhaps the process is lengthened and there are more people involved, clearly. But for me, it's still, people or a person being impacted and their livelihood being impacted. Some of the programs that I've been involved in, leading or supporting in recent years have been as a result of Brexit or the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think I was very mindful at those times that people had already been through a hard time, professionally, personally, to then end up with potentially losing their job. And in some cases, people did lose their jobs. So that was quite difficult. And I was very mindful of just looking after people through that process.
And when you're managing, as you say, one person or 100 people who are at risk, what are some of the themes or the things that you'll always carry with you when you're in that process? You mentioned there about the kind of the context, maybe. Are there other things that you've always got front of mind?
I think I always try to keep front of mind that you never really know what's going on in somebody's life. So until the point that you break the news to them that they are potentially at risk of redundancy, you don't always know what's going on. You cannot ever predict how somebody's going to react, how somebody's going to take that news. So I think as far as possible, and I know we're going to come on and talk about this, it's being mindful of what's the wider context in terms of why the business is having to make these changes, but also knowing what's going on in the wider world as well. At the moment, the last few years, we've seen a cost of living crisis. Times are really challenging for people. The cost of everything is going up and up and up. You throw into the mix there, you may potentially not have a job. That's going to impact people clearly. And that's before you really know what else might be going on in their personal lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of planning redundancies, I know you're someone who said yourself, planning is a huge part of when you're approaching any size of restructuring. What are some of the things that you always make sure are involved in preparing and planning for redundancies?
Yeah, so for me, it's all about the planning. And I think the main theme that I've always had running throughout my planning is communication. So what are the key communication points from the start right to the end and beyond? So thinking about who's impacted and who you need to speak to, how are you going to brief them and who's going to be responsible for actually briefing them? Is that going to be the line manager of a team? Is it going to be a senior director for a business unit? Is it the chief executive of the business? So really just understanding how your business works and who's the most appropriate person to deliver the message. And then at those communication points, who is going to hold the consultation meetings with the individuals? Who's going to be on hand? Where are you going to send them to? Is it you as the HR professional or the HR team that receives any queries in between meetings, for example? So I really do just plan. I know that sometimes you may not always have the luxury of time, but if you do, Really, I would suggest that people just get their heads down and think about every single piece of that process.
Sometimes, as we know in HR, the devil can be in the detail, and going down into that minute, almost as you say, well, where are you going to hold the meetings? And I have experienced myself from being put at risk of redundancy, where I had to come in off maternity leave, walk through an open plan office into my consultation meeting. There was actually an office that was just inside the front door, which for someone on maternity leave or anyone who's out of the business would have been a preferred place to kind of do that. So even down to some of those details, I know we talked before that you take great care to think about some of the logistics of all of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So every little detail really matters. So I've had cases where there's very minimal meeting space, and the meeting space that is available basically looks like a large goldfish bowl. That for me is not an appropriate place to hold a meeting where you're delivering difficult news, whether that's the at-risk piece or, at the end of the process, you are confirmed as redundant. I have experienced myself where I've been in a redundancy meeting where I'm impacted, and being told in a group setting when perhaps an individual setting might have been more appropriate for that case. So lots of different experiences for me. And I think the other thing to be mindful of is looking at the detail of who's impacted and even when they're on holiday. I've had cases before where you get to the very end of the planning stage, ready to make an announcement, and perhaps one of the key managing directors is off on holiday, or they announce at the end of a week and then they're not available for 3 weeks. So really just thinking about, as far as possible, if you can shift the timing to make sure the key people are available, then that's crucial. Something else I've always done as well is just had a look. Hopefully, if you have an HR system that allows you to do this, plan ahead, look at who's on holiday, and if you might need to be communicating with them in a different way. Think about the people that are on sickness absence or parental leave, for example, and how you're going to communicate with them so they don't hear about it from a colleague and perhaps get half a story of Chinese whispers. So again, think about how the chain of communication is going to happen, down to who's responsible, what time are you going to make the phone call, what are you going to say. So really, really plan every little detail, because I think that does allow for you to, yes, there will be surprises because people are involved. So you don't know how they're going to respond to those meetings, to those announcements, to those conversations, but it does allow you to have a structure to work to as far as possible.
Absolutely. And that also, it sets the tone for the whole process, in that, as you say, if the manager makes the announcement and then's on holiday for 2 weeks, people can make inferences into that. Oh, it's all right for them because, they're off on a beach somewhere and here we are left wondering kind of what's going on. And I know that piece around visibility is hugely important as well. Not just the HR team, but encouraging leaders to be visible and checking in on people during the meetings. I know that's something, again, that you really advocate. So when you are line managers to these conversations, which are inevitably difficult, what are some of the things that, again, you're making sure that they understand, not just about the process, but about the people that are impacted?
Yeah, well, first of all, this isn't HR's job to deliver a redundancy program. We're there to support and to guide and to make sure that it's done in the right way, both legally and, I guess, morally. For me, line managers play a huge part. They're the ones that, in an ideal world, know their teams really well, know the individuals, could perhaps give some insight as to how people might respond, how they might take the news. Something that I always do as part of any redundancy planning, whether it's one role or 100, is prepare the line managers. And I go as far as delivering a coaching session for them. So whether or not they've done this before, whether or not they're the most senior person in the business, we shouldn't assume that they know what to do or how to do it. They might be great at their job, but not so good at delivering bad news, for example. So really giving them some insights into a redundancy process and obviously the legal side of it and what we must do, but also the way that we probably should do things, and just remembering that you've got a human at the heart of this. So I will always give them I guess what I call the nuts and bolts of redundancy, but then we also go into topics like handling difficult conversations, dealing with different reactions, shouting, crying. I've seen lots of them and you never quite know what you're going to get. And I would always give managers a script as well. So a script for any announcement and a script for consultation meetings. So that just means that they are covering the right things and that everybody who's impacted is being treated consistently and receiving consistent messages. But I would also encourage them not to sound like a robot. If you're just reading from a script, it's very inhuman, isn't it? So just to make sure that they throw in, pauses, listening, checking in with the person. How are you? Tell me how you've been. Tell me what's been going on. And I think the other piece of advice that I do give for managers is please clear your diary, especially on the day of an announcement. Don't make an announcement and then rush off to another meeting. Don't make the announcement on a day that your diary is full of board meetings or other important topics. Just clear the diary, be available, hang around, have a coffee. I have seen it where leaders have literally been rushing to get through an announcement script to go off to somewhere else. And again, that just doesn't leave a good feeling for the employees at the heart of it. So as far as possible, getting them to clear their diaries and reminding them just to be human. It's okay if somebody comes to you with a question and it's not in a consultation meeting. It's okay if they want to have a rant and a moan to you in between times. That's what your job is for me in that moment, is to be a good leader and a good manager and to support your staff through a difficult time.
Really interesting there, you said about not making assumptions and that it is not the job of HR to deliver this news. And so that training session, that coaching session, I love the way you pitched that, is I'm coaching them, to give them the skills, to give them the information and the ability to have these conversations. And again, it's sort of setting things up at the start, isn't it? It's all these foundations that you're laying for a consistent, legally compliant, but a human process with people. And I love what you said there about just turning up as humans. Sometimes people worry about, well, how do I show up in these sorts of meetings? Well, just show up as you and connect with the individual. And after that, you can't really go wrong. And then what you said there about clearing the diary, I think that's hugely important. Because again, it's not the kind of thing you can just squeeze in between meetings, and people will inevitably be looking to their line managers for support and to ask questions. So having that, and it also emphasizes the importance of what they're about to deliver as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. They're prioritizing it because it's the priority in that moment.
Yeah. Wonderful. You talked before about your experience of being put at risk and then of having secured a role. And when we're talking about the communication plan and going into the detail, and I've done this myself, there's a huge amount of focus on those people who could be impacted. There's also that group of people who aren't impacted or who will ultimately kind of remain in the organisation. What advice and what things have you done in the past that have made sure that those people who aren't ultimately directly impacted still are included in the communication plan and communication process?
Yeah, so it goes back for me to the planning of your communication. So when you are planning the communication, clearly the priority are the people that are impacted, but you also need to think about what are we going to say to the rest of the organisation. So whether that's their direct teammates, whether it's the whole business, it very much depends on the size and the context. But I've seen this go quite wrong, actually, where a decision was taken just to keep it a very closed process. But of course, those people that are receiving that news want to talk. And I've heard horror stories of where somebody's heard something in the smoking shelter or in the canteen while they're making a coffee. Again, Chinese whispers can be quite dangerous in a business. So take control of the message that you're going to deliver to the rest of the business. Now, clearly, at the start, you can't just say, oh, guess what? Joe Bloggs is at risk of redundancy. But what you can say is something around the fact that there are some organisational changes. We're currently in conversation with some people that could potentially be impacted. We will keep you updated, something along those lines. You do need to respect confidentiality, of course, but I think I would rather that a leader takes charge of the communication up front rather than letting the message run away with itself and become fake news and incorrect communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And those people who will remain in the organisation, so the survivors, is that term? I don't like that term, but that's a term that is generally used. Those are the individuals who you're wanting to then help rebuild the organisation and continue to make the business successful, as it were. So when you're at the end of the process now, and you're focusing on those individuals and helping line managers to keep them engaged and motivated, because inevitably there is always a dip in motivation. There's a dip in performance because change is uncertain, it's unstable. I'll say that bit again.
change is inevitably destabilizing. What advice and guidance do you give to line managers in that part of the process? Because often everyone's exhausted, they've managed the process, the people have left, they've left in the right way, and they kind of think, breathe a sigh of relief, right? Phew. But it's then thinking about those people who've been with them on the journey and now need their support and their guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. So remembering that these people have lost colleagues, and in some cases, they might have been really close to those colleagues. They could be impacted by the change in that way. Equally, I think the most common outcome I see here is people are thinking, oh gosh, it's me next. The creeping death of redundancy, is it my role in the next round? And actually that puts you at risk of losing more people when potentially you don't want to lose them. So I think it's just being very open, and again, perhaps planning this into the ongoing communication. Have the conversations, be open as far as you can, listen to their concerns, listen to their questions. I think if you have the tools in place, use employee surveys, pulse checks, get some feedback, whether that's anonymous or otherwise, and just really understand what's on people's minds. Now, clearly, we can never guarantee job security forever for anybody, but as far as possible, just be open about the future of the business. What's next? What's the plan? What's coming on the horizon? Hopefully there are some good news stories there for some organisations that can help to allay some of the fears. But again, I think for me, it just always comes back to communication. Don't bury your head in the sand. People are going to be worried. So actually have the conversation and understand what those worries are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that piece that you mentioned before about being visible, about showing up, not just for those people at risk, but for all of the team during uncertain times. You know, could be HR professionals listening to this episode who've never managed a redundancy process before. And understandably, it can be complicated, it can be emotionally charged, and there's a lot involved. What would be some of the advice that you would give to someone who's doing this for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I think it's back to what I said about planning. So as far as possible, get to know the redundancy process, look at the ACAS website to give you that statutory guidance, but then build into that the information about your own business, knowing the people as much as you do, planning the people aspect, and just think about being human. How would you like to be treated? How would you like that kind of meeting to be approached for you? And I think you can't go far wrong. The other thing I would definitely add for HR practitioners is look after yourselves in this. It can be a tough time. I think the HR team that's involved in any redundancy program can be seen as a negative. They can be seen as the ones to blame and to throw the emotions at. So you can really suffer with sort of feeling like you're the one to blame. So definitely in the planning and in the time frames, planning time for yourself and make sure you are looking after yourself and your own well-being.
Yeah, it's an intense time. And often when I was managing these programs, you had to keep all the other plates spinning as well. It wasn't that you could stop everything else. This was just something else that was thrown at you and thrown into the mix. So that's a really important point to look after yourself and not get lost in the process. So Lorna, I mean, that's been a really useful and interesting and practical insight into your experience of managing redundancies. And from your perspective, the work that you do now. So tell us a bit about the work that you do now and how people can find you if they're interested in either getting some support for their restructuring or getting an extra pair of hands, maybe for somebody who might be doing a large scale program and needs some experience like yours on the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So one of the projects I delivered towards the end of last year was I supported an in-house HR team with a redundancy program. And that was simply because the HR team themselves were at capacity. So I helicoptered in and supported them with the redundancy program. And at the same time, I hopefully left that HR team with some additional skills as well, because they did support in the process. So I am happy to come in and support in-house HR teams with any change programs that they have going on. I've been there. I understand how, like you just said, June, the business as usual doesn't stop. So sometimes you could just do with an extra pair of hands who's a bit of an expert in this to come in, help you deliver it, and then to hopefully leave things in a better place to move forward with. And I love supporting sort of small to medium businesses that have exciting growth plans. I'm supporting a couple of businesses at the moment that are looking to grow over the next couple of years, and therefore I'm helping them with the HR basics, so the processes, the procedures, getting in systems. So that's all quite exciting. So if you do want to get in touch with me and think I might be able to help you, please do. I'm very active over on LinkedIn. So you can find me, Lorna Moles, or you can find my business page, Farrell HR.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lorna. And I'll put those links in the show notes for anyone who wants to connect. I've so enjoyed our conversation. It's been wonderful just to hear about your kind of live experience, because this is live and this is real for you because you are supporting organisations that are doing this. And I've loved hearing about those themes around communication, about connecting with individuals on a human level, and also that piece around visibility and, importantly, as a HR team, making sure that you find time for yourselves as well during all of this. So thank you so much, Lorna. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I hope that everyone's enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the Redundancy Matters podcast. I hope you found today's episode helpful. It would mean a lot to me if you would follow, rate and review this podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, as this helps it reach more people who are managing redundancies. Let me know what you thought, and if you have ideas for future episodes, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on LinkedIn, June Hogan, and get in touch via my website, wildwoodcoaching.co.uk, where you'll also find more resources to help you manage redundancies. I hope you'll join me again soon for the next episode of Redundancy Matters.